All right, I'll call to order this meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee on March 23rd. We will go through the initial script as people are still joining us. So for this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or acts inappropriately. I am Mary Longacre, the chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. To get started, I'll confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Gary Beller.
Here.
Good morning. Sarah Boyce. Sarah,
here.
Good morning. Peter Brace.
Here.
Graham Durovich.
Here.
Do I see Matt Fee yet? We'll come back to Matt. Ian Golding.
Yes.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
Fritz McClure did tell us he would not be available today, and I am Mary Longacre. So staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Present.
Holly Backus.
Present.
And do we have any other members of town staff with us today? I don't see anyone. And then anticipated speakers on the agenda, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Julia Neisel.
Here.
And Kimberly Rose.
Hello.
Good morning to everybody. And Claire Martin.
Here.
Thank you, Claire. Vince, did I miss anyone? No, okay.
All good.
So this open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. Time permitting, this meeting will feature public comment. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and take care not to share your screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Before we move to the first item on the agenda, I will cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly and in a way to generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Also, members of the public are invited to send comments via email to Vince Murphy at vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. Those comments can be read into the meeting agenda, particularly if you're not able to attend in person. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Let me also add, for members of the public, there is a raise hand feature under the reactions button in Zoom. And if you're not recognized, you can also send a chat message to me, the chair, Mary Longacre, or to Vince Murphy, letting us know that you have a comment you'd like to offer. All right, the first item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from March 9th. Vince, can you put those up on the screen? And were there any comments or questions about the minutes on March 9th? Yes, Vince.
Beg your pardon. And
just sharing that there now. Everyone should be able to see it. There's one thing about the minutes. I apparently made an error and had these posted to the town website when they weren't approved. In checking back, there's issues with previous minutes that were approved that I've sent in that are not on the town website from 2020 and early 2021. I'm going to have to go back and correct all of these, and also make the note that once these are approved today and any amendments made, I will have them correctly posted.
Thank you, Vince. Any comments from members on the minutes? Okay, Sarah, could I ask you to look at the bottom of the second page of the minutes, if you can scroll down, Vince? There is a discussion attributed to you that I think could use a better explanation. So under new business, Sarah Boyce mentioned the land bank's recommendations to the select board. When I reviewed the meeting, yes, those words are correct, but I think they're lacking context. If you want to provide more context, Sarah.
Yeah, so trying to think succinctly for the minutes, but in general, it was specifically Rachel Freeman's request to have a, or let's see, how do I put this shortly? Basically, the scientific information that the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee is using to have kind of a one-page document of citations that would be easy to, for when they're looking for that information. So Nantucket specific information.
So, so the land bank's request for specific scientific information beyond the recommendation that the committee had already made to the select board? Mm-hmm. Okay. When I read it at first, I wondered what recommendations the land bank had given to the select board. I didn't remember it correctly from that sentence. Vince, are you able to edit that on the fly?
Yes, I am. Just need to know what to say. Will I just put in a sentence to the effect? It was concerning, I think the term last week was the science used, or we could change it to the methods used.
No, so I'm sorry. I need to make a correction. There was no, it wasn't at all about the recommendations to the select board. There was no like conflict or anything. It was basically asking if we could put out something that would kind of put all the scientific data together in one, maybe it's just the citations, but into one document. So basically, as for example, the land bank's using information, they want to know what the information that we use and recommend is, rather than starting, rather than reinventing the wheel, and we've all kind of coalesced everything together. That was the general gist of it. It wasn't in reflection at all on the recommendations to the select board.
Okay, so if nobody minds, can I just ask an open question to Sarah and all committee members? Sarah Boyce mentioned the land banks, and then this is where I started editing, request for a one-page document covering, what should I say it's covering?
Yeah, covering, I mean, it was a very general request. It was, so it wasn't like even fleshed out what we would actually cover, but it was a one-page document covering the science and the references that the CREC is using, I guess is sufficient for the minutes.
Thank you, Sarah and Vince.
People happy with this?
Just
Any
yeah, there you go.
Any other thoughts before I change?
Comments from committee members? If there are no further comments, does somebody want to make a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
Move approval.
Thank you, Gary. Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll take that as Sarah. I think there were 3 people at once there. Thank you. So roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Graham Durovich,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Present.
I'm sorry, Fritz isn't here, and Mary Longacre, aye. That's 8-0. The next item is announcements. So the first announcement, We are on the select board's agenda for tomorrow night to announce the visual presentation toolkit, the FAQs, and the storytelling cards. Vince expects to do that presentation. And I guess, thank you, Vince. That's we'll watch you tomorrow. The Natural Resources Department Planting Day, as previously noted, is still expected for tomorrow as well. Vince will have a busy day. The Civic League is hosting a virtual forum on Zoom titled Chapter 91, the Public Waterfront Act. More information there on their website. And there is an agenda in the pack that came with the meeting announcement today. Resilient Nantucket Designs for Adaptation. The registration is open. It went live just a couple of days ago. There is a link on the Acclimate website for that. That's probably the easiest reference, acclimate.org to that. And so, Holly, did you want to say anything now that that is scheduled? Holly Backus.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, Resilient Nantucket. So you all are familiar with our initiative, the MVP Action Grant, to create design guidelines for adaptation for our natural historic landmark. This MVP Action Grant is basically at the end of the project. Even with all COVID restrictions, we've been able to go through and work on them, and we're waiting on the final draft from our consultants. So appreciate everybody's input that you all have actually provided in that effort as well. But this is the final hurrah, if you will, and you'll see that it's not just Nantucket. This is actually getting subject matter experts from all over the world. So it should be very, very interesting and exciting. And I hope you take the initiative to sign up. I will tell you that we do have to sign up for each individual day. It will kick off on Earth Day for a little bit, and then it will be that following 24th and 25th event. So look forward to it, and let me know if you have any questions in the meantime. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Holly. It looks like a great lineup. It'll be pretty interesting. And just a reminder to committee members, if you are planning to attend, let Vince know so he can track whether or not we'll have a quorum. As I mentioned, Acclimate does have an event calendar on their website. It's listed there in the meeting announcement. Before we continue, I do note there are a couple of people who do not have their full names showing on their Zoom window. If you're able, Elizabeth's iPad and Rebecca in particular, to edit that so that your name is showing, that would be wonderful. If you don't know how, send a chat message to Vince Murphy with your name and he can edit it for you. Thank you. So our first guest today is Julia Neisel from the Mass Coastal Zone Management, Shoreline and Coastal Floodplain Manager there. She's going to give us more information about the Massachusetts climate change projections, and that was a PDF that we included a link in the meeting agenda for people to retrieve. Julia, please go ahead.
Mary, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen and run through a few slides to highlight some international, national, and regional reports that serve as the basis for the understanding on how to best model sea level rise over the century, and point you to some resources that we have in Massachusetts for local planning. And I'm actually glad that you mentioned the MVP project, because the tools and documents that are relevant to that process will be highlighted at the end. So let me just share my screen really quick. Oh, hold on one second, it just disappeared. So I'm assuming you're seeing it now?
Yes, we are.
Great. So I actually had the good fortune to cover this topic a few years back when a different local committee was looking at a coastal management plan for the islands. And I'm able to provide a little bit more detailed information at this point based on where we are with the modeling. The one thing that hasn't changed is the record at the Nantucket tide gauge. So NOAA has been maintaining the gauge there on the island since 1965. And that record shows that 0.7 feet of sea level rise has occurred over the time that NOAA has been taking measurements there. And if you extend that out over a century, that's over a foot of rise. So that's baseline understanding as we look forward in terms of picking a sea level rise projection for planning purposes, as well as for designing projects to help mitigate flooding and erosion problems. I grabbed this figure from the 5th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This was released back in 2014, and I think it does a very nice job of articulating all of the major processes along the coast that are sensitive to climate change, particularly increased air temperatures, increased water temperatures, and how that impacts regional and relative sea level. The pieces that a lot of people are familiar with are the hydrologic cycle, something that's foundational in earth science classes growing up. But the pieces that, you know, start to cause some confusion is around the properties of the water, the thermal expansion, salinity, density of the water, and how that affects the circulation. And then the other really big piece that comes into play when we're talking about sea level rise projections and modeling, is what I circled here, the factor of ice sheets and ice shelf loss. So this is where we're going to see a lot of additional scientific research in the next decade. And this is where we're going to see a lot of refinement in the sea level rise projections. So what I present today, remember, it's not a perfect answer, but it's the best understanding based on the observations that we have right now of the, you know, changing climate and how to model that. So keep that in mind. This is a feature of the report that was put out in 2017, but primarily by NOAA, but also in collaboration with pretty much every other federal scientific organization and academic research institutes across the country. This was the foundational technical report for the 4th National Climate Assessment that came out the following year. And these two documents, as you know from your contract with Malone and McBroom and their review, really sets the foundation in terms of the emissions standards, as well as how to calculate all of the physical parameters that go into sea level rise projections. The huge wild card in all of this is actually how ice loss is going to contribute to sea level rise that we experience in Massachusetts and out on Nantucket. This is a graphic from that NOAA 2017 report showing the influence of Greenland, West Antarctic, East Antarctic ice sheets, as well as glacier contributions to regional sea level rise. So what you're seeing with the color ramp is actually the sea level that's experienced regionally relative to the global sea level rise. So if you look closely at the United States and zoom into New England and Nantucket, you're going to see that for the West Antarctic ice sheets and the East Antarctic ice sheets, we're in the red zone, which means that if we see significant losses of that ice, we're actually going to experience it greater in New England and Massachusetts and Nantucket. And that's something to just watch, in the news as additional scientific reports come out, and just be flexible in terms of your planning and project design, so that if we do start to see some major contributions here, that you can potentially build in some added resiliency into your projects. This slide is showing the representative concentration pathways that are used for presenting sea level rise scenarios. This was a shift in communicating how carbon emissions contribute to scenario planning in the last few years. If you look on the left graphic, you'll see that we have 4 scenarios. We have the observed, and then we have low, kind of an intermediate, and then a higher scenario. And those are all based on fossil fuel emissions, how much carbon we're contributing globally to the atmosphere. And then the right graphic correlates with those emission scenarios and shows what the temperature increase could be over time if we were to track on any one of those emissions scenarios. So the representative concentration pathway, or RCP 8.5, is kind of the worst case scenario that's being presented for planning and project design purposes. And that is assuming, or assuming is a good word, I guess, that we're going to have increased population growth, that we're not going to be successful in capturing carbon, and we also are going to continue to be major fossil fuel emitters globally. So that's the assumption, that we as a society are not being responsible to the climate change issue. We're not, getting net zero, across many countries, and we, yeah. But I'm just going to leave it at that. So that's the baseline assumption of this worst case scenario. So in Massachusetts, we actually are very lucky to have access to amazingly talented climate scientists, both at our state universities, but also in nearby state universities as well. So here I feature 2 scientists that the state contracted with to actually take all of the global information from the global climate models and bring that information down to our local tide gauges here. So I already mentioned you have a gauge right out on Nantucket, but we also have gauges in Woods Hole and Boston as well. So we were able to get their expert assistance on taking all that information and bringing it down to our local tide gauges for our purposes of planning and project design. So we're very fortunate to have their assistance. The information that they produced was foundational to the state's hazard mitigation and climate adaptation planning. And the report was put out in September of 2018. The report has the sea level rise projections in it. And for the range at 2100, we're looking at anything between 4 and 10.5 feet. That's what the state has put forward in terms of what's likely. And that range, like I mentioned before, is highly dependent on our societal decisions and behavior in terms of how successful we are at changing our contributions of fossil fuels into the atmosphere and how successful we are at innovating in terms of capturing carbon and doing many other things to try and change our outcome in the 2070-2100 timeframe. So in addition to having the climate projections in the state hazard mitigation and climate adaptation plan, there's also a website that you may be familiar with, the resilientma.org. And that website also has the document that Vince shared, which was kind of the white paper for the municipal vulnerability preparedness planning and action activities with the communities. So in that, you can get Nantucket specific information. That's this table here that I've blown up. So this matrix, if you will, kind of crosswalks, you know, some possible future scenarios with climate and sea level rise. So we've got some major decadal milestones. We've got 2030, 2050, 2070, and 2100. And you can see what's reasonable to you in terms of how much risk you're willing to assume and you know, what your comfort level is with planning for that worst case scenario with regard to emissions. So if you're looking at 2100, like I mentioned before with the state plan, the range on the lower end is roughly 4 feet by the end of the century, and the upper end is 10.5 feet. If you look across the chart at the, not the maximum, but the high, that's where the state has chosen to model dynamic flooding for the purposes of, you know, assessing vulnerability and planning and design projects. So if your intent is to align with state recommendations and tools, this is what I would look at closely, because this is what was chosen for the modeling by Mass DOT and Woods Hole Group for the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model. Oops, excuse me a second, let me go back. So Nantucket is in the south grid for the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, and you'll see that the sea level values for the south grid align with the Nantucket gauge projections, except for the 2100 timeframe. 7.8 is 1/10 of a foot lower than what was projected for the Nantucket gauge. So there's a subtle difference there, but that shouldn't impact the coastal storm flooding significantly for that time frame.
Julie, can I jump in for a second? So I just want to make sure that we're clear about what level we're talking about. You just mentioned coastal storm flooding. And to me, a storm tide is one that's in excess of the sea level.
That's correct.
So I just want to be clear. So we're talking that what's showing on the screen, 7.8, 2100 in the south area, that's just sea level, not including any storm surge.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's the base grid that Woods Hole Group is using to model the impact of coastal storms, you know, around Massachusetts. So once you model the storm pushing up towards the shoreline and running up over land, then you start to see the probabilities of coastal flooding at the different scenario years, and then you'll also have access to the depths of flooding associated with those storm events as well.
Great, thank you. Please continue.
Sure. So finally, Vince had asked me to help you all make sense of the NOAA 2017 document, the state projections, what Malone and McBroom produced for you. And what I gathered from the report is that Malone and McBroom used the Army Corps sea level rise calculator to take the national sea level rise projections and bring those down to the local tide gauge using the Army Corps formulas. And you know, the consensus was that you were going to hit the 4 to 6 or more feet of sea level rise by 2100, which is consistent with what the state is putting out. However, if you use the information that those two climate scientists that I highlighted at the beginning produced, you're going to get a little finer grain information in terms of the sea level rise projections. So everything is consistent. It's just the COP and DeConto downscaled projections are the best available information. And I recommend using that for your purposes of planning and, you know, any infrastructure improvements or, you know, planning or design projects. And just to recap, you can gain access to all that information on the Resilient MA tool. And once the Massachusetts Coast flood risk modeling information is uploaded onto state servers, that information will be linked to the Resilient MA. And that's why I just want to make sure that you remember to familiarize yourself with that tool. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen unless anyone has any questions about the graphics.
Thank you, Julia. I think you can take the screen share down and we can always ask you to put it back up again if we need to. Are there comments or questions from committee members? Yes, Ian, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Julia, for your presentation. And it certainly gives us a wide range of permutations and possibilities. And NOAA's own website says an extreme example is 8.6 feet by the end of the century. I'm pessimistic with small p, in as much as we, as a country, only represent, you know, 10% of the world's population. And if that, actually, it's closer to 5, isn't it? And you know, India, of course, wants to ramp up with 1.1 billion people. China's building still 1 coal plant a week, from what I understand. And so I would have thought, in terms of planning strategically, it would be sensible to use the 8 feet sea level rise rather than the 4. And because I would have thought that if that, I mean, because if that turns to be incorrect, then good. But on the other hand, if you're already spending the money to protect, why not protect for the worst case scenario, or at least put that into the formula? And the one aspect, as you were saying, how uncertain it is the tipping point for, you know, Greenland is a good example. As of course, you know much more about it than I do, about how they're discovering just how much meltwater there is, you know, between the rock and the ice and the acceleration of the ice caps. So thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Julia, did you have a response or should I go on to someone else?
I appreciate everything that Ian said. And once you have access to the Mass Coast flood risk model, you will have the ability to look at future tidal conditions with that 7.8 feet elevation sea level, and also the, you know, the flooding associated with coastal storms in the future with that increased sea level.
Thank you, Julia. Other comments or questions from committee members? All right, seeing none, Julia, I don't know if Vince made you aware, I assume he did, that we're doing a coastal resilience plan at the moment. But we had also, in anticipation of the plan taking some time to complete, made a recommendation to our select board that we follow the NOAA high scenario. And so one of the questions that this committee will address is, should we revise that recommendation? Should we do that now? Should we wait for the coastal resilience plan to provide information? That's something that we can discuss at a future meeting among the committee members. And I believe that one of the reasons that we're excited to have you here today is because the coastal resilience plan consultants are already indicating that they will be using the Massachusetts data rather than the NOAA data. And so we wanted to bridge that decision with information that provided background on why you might choose one or the other. So thank you very much for your presentation. I really appreciate that you were able to join us today.
Yeah, so Mary, if I may,
Yep.
to clarify, you know, your recommendation is still valid and accurate. The technical report that was produced by NOAA et al. In 2017 correlates with the high sea level rise scenario that the state selected. However, I would just put a finer point on your recommendation to say that the national information needs to be downscaled for Nantucket, and that's where you get the finer resolution information that's presented in the table that's available in the state plan and also Resilient MA.
Great, thank you. And any further comments or questions from committee members? And if not, then I will open it for public comment and questions for Julia. Do we have any members of the public that wish to offer a comment or question? Not seeing any. So again, thank you very much, Julia. I appreciate that you were able to join us today and really enjoyed your presentation.
Thanks, Mary. May I make one quick plug before I don't have the floor any longer? Nantucket has been successful in acquiring state grant funds from a variety of sources, and one of which is funded by my program, the Coastal Resilience Grant Program. So we've awarded you 3 grants since the launch of the program in 2014. And I just want to make sure that you're aware that the opportunity will be posted again soon this spring. So if you are thinking about doing any follow-up work on, you know, the vulnerability assessment or visualizations or any planning activities, design of any infrastructure improvements, you know, I'm here as a resource if you want to run any ideas past me. Once the RFR is released, then we won't be able to be as candid in our guidance of what would be a strong project.
Right, so thank you for the heads up. I'm sure Vince is taking notes.
Great. Okay. Well, best of luck with all that.
Thank you. Enjoy the beautiful weather today. It feels like spring.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to switch over to the next topic on the agenda, which is the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge Speaker Series. And I'll welcome Kimberly Rose to give us a brief recap of what might have been points relevant to Nantucket in the last 2 weeks of speakers.
Yeah, thank you again for inviting me. So week 6, we heard from 2 fantastic speakers that basically talked about how we have a relationship with the water and how it's not always mutually beneficial, and it's a little bit symbiotic and a little turbulent at times, and how there's a movement to reintroduce ecologies and how we need to reimagine our relation of our settlements to water, and then reformulate as well the human relation to the water, and introduce hybrid systems or anything like that. And there was some really great examples from week 6 of water management engineering systems that are hybrid and kind of broach those topics. And then there was also a talk with Dr. Christina Hill that was looking much more closely at Nantucket and looking at the geology and hydrology of the harbor and the surroundings, and how like if CO2, for instance, was to erode away, how the sand will kind of just melt into the harbor and we won't have a harbor, and how bathtub models don't necessarily show that, and how erosion and sea level rise will interact with each other, and reform what we know as the island, particularly in our low-lying areas, which is the majority of Nantucket. Week 7.
I'll interject, Kimberly. As somebody with a geology degree, I was absolutely fascinated by Dr. Hill's presentation. It was wonderful.
Right. And the use of historic maps and everything was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. Week 7 was with Chris from STOS, who's also working on the Coastal Resilience Plan. And basically he looked at landscape architecture and how landscaping can really help absorb water, absorb that wave action, and particularly looked at the Olmsted landscape systems, which are basically systems of parks or different other kind of landscape architecture, and looking backward in order to move forward, to know where we're coming from, to know where we're going. And that engineering necessarily isn't always the answer. And that was carried on through the next speaker, David Wagoner, who talked about Humboldt and living water systems, such as the Dutch dialogues that he worked on, and came up with essentially 8 values of resilience: safe, natural, heritage, integrated, sufficient, nimble, and innovative. And his final takeaway was kind of, people are part of nature and we need to go back to that root and stop engineering nature away.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. The speaker series has been just one great presentation after another. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy Wednesday nights a lot more.
Well, I have to wait till Thursday morning to see them, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're all available online on the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge website as well.
Yes. And we have a link to that in our agenda.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. So next up is a presentation from Remain Nantucket. Claire Martin, and I see also Cecil Barron Jensen are here from Remain. This is regarding the Envision Resilience survey that they performed. And there was a link to the press release with a summary of the survey in our agenda. But Claire, would you tell us more about it?
Yes, thank you, Mary. And thank you to the committee for having us today. As many of you know, we conducted a survey measuring attitudes on climate change on Nantucket. The survey was conducted in partnership with Acclimate. We had a lot of feedback from Acclimate partners last fall when we were putting this together, and we hired the Boston-based firm EBP to help us conduct this survey. So we actually do have Scott Middleton here today, who will run us through their analysis of the survey. But really what the survey did was reaffirm, what we had assessed about attitudes of climate change on Nantucket. This is the first in a 2-part series. And while we set out originally to use this survey as a way to measure the impact of the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge on the community, it was quickly clear that this survey did, and in the second survey we'll also measure, how all of these ongoing initiatives like the Resilient Nantucket and the MVP grant, the work of the town and the Coastal Resilience Plan, and all of the work that Acclimate and other smaller groups as well have been doing and continue to do on the island. So I'll hand it over to Scott to run us through an analysis.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Scott Middleton from the consulting firm EVP, and I worked with Claire, Kimberly, Cecil, and others on setting up this survey and reporting our results. So I will share my screen now. Hopefully everybody can see those slides. Someone yell at me if there's something wrong.
Looks good, thank you.
Okay, and I will try to be as succinct as possible today. But I'll go through our study purpose and methodology. I'll explain a bit about who responded to the survey, and then I'll go through our findings. And I'll note that the findings are basically divided into findings relating to attitudes, attitudes towards climate change globally, and attitudes towards climate change on Nantucket. and then attitudes related to individual and community actions that can be taken to mitigate or adapt to climate change. And I think Claire did a great job of explaining what the study purpose was, so I won't go into greater detail here, except to reiterate that the emphasis of the survey was to measure community attitudes towards climate change, and especially sea level rise as a chief among climate change impacts that we anticipate. We had just over 300 respondents to our survey, which was open at the beginning of the year, January into early February. We opened the survey to both year-round residents and seasonal or frequent visitors to the island, but more than half of the respondents were year-round residents. And the bar graph at the right shows you which area of the island or neighborhood the respondents call home, so to speak. So I think that was a good spread of neighborhoods represented, but notably we did get a good number of respondents from some of the areas that are emphasized by the Envision Nantucket Resilience Challenge, including town. I've got a couple of charts here explaining who responded to our survey. In a couple of areas, the survey sort of overrepresented or underrepresented certain slices of the Nantucket population. So you'll see here the red bars represent our survey sample, where the gray bars represent the population of Nantucket more broadly from using Census American Community Survey data. So for example, we were overrepresented with older adults, over 50 or even over 70, and underrepresented among younger folks on Nantucket. We had more women than men participate in the survey. We also had sort of an oversampling of higher income folks on Nantucket and those with higher levels of education, bachelor's degrees and advanced degrees. Nonetheless, I share this information just to point out that we were able to sample a sort of wide range of folks on Nantucket in terms of education, income, age, and so forth. Getting into some of the attitudes towards climate change that we observed, if nothing else, we learned that folks on Nantucket are curious about climate change and willing to take time to educate themselves and to learn more. More than half of our respondents opted into receiving additional information, learning materials, resources about adaptive strategies for flooding and other climate change impacts on Nantucket. So they chose to receive an email digest of these resources that Remain Nantucket and partners put together. So I thought that was positive because I myself tend not to opt into emails. I have a flood of emails in my inbox. So if someone agrees to receive an email, they must truly be curious and engaged. We used also a framework from the Yale program on climate change communications to describe attitudes towards climate change broadly on Nantucket. The folks at Yale created this 6-part framework of 6 different types of attitudes that people can have towards climate change, ranging from alarmed to dismissive, doubtful, and disengaged. The little sketch cartoons here on the slide explain a little bit about what each of those attitudes might entail, although I think that the names are obvious as well. Just to set some background here, nationally, about 26% of Americans are alarmed, according to this Yale study, and that's increased from 11 to 26% just in the past 5 years. And the share of folks that are dismissive, doubtful, or disengaged has also decreased over that time period. So keep that in mind. On the next slide, I'll show you what attitudes are on Nantucket, and you'll see a really noteworthy and important finding from the survey is that nearly 90% of those who responded to our survey on Nantucket are either alarmed or at least concerned about climate change on the island. And this is compared to much smaller share of the population nationwide. So it's not necessarily a good thing that many Americans are disengaged, doubtful, or dismissive when it comes to climate change. But I do think that it's positive to see that folks on Nantucket are really on the other end of the spectrum. They're very alarmed about climate change, and as I'll show you later on in the presentation, willing to take action and excited to take action about it. So this is a lot of statements on a slide here, and I'll pull out just a couple more to focus in on the next slide. But we asked all of the respondents to rate their levels of agreement towards various attitudes about climate change, statements reflecting attitudes about climate change on Nantucket. You'll see here, we asked them to rate their level of agreement from 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree, on statements such as it's appropriate for government actors to prepare for the impact of climate change. The effects of climate change will personally affect me, my friends, or my family, and so on. And in general, we saw high levels of agreement to these statements, again, reflecting that overall finding that people are alarmed and concerned about climate change. To pull out just a couple of those statements to focus on here, I have 2 statements with sort of lower levels of agreement on the left and 2 statements with higher levels of agreement on the right. 3.4 out of 5, so that represents just sort of a medium level of agreement, was the average level of agreement with the statement, the effects of climate change have already affected me, my friends, and my family. But contrasting that to the statement, the effects of climate change will personally affect me, my friends, and my family, we see a much or somewhat greater level of agreement there, I think indicating that people are anticipating climate change impacts to become more severe on the island, which is appropriate. The bottom pair of statements here, it's appropriate for the town to spend tax dollars to protect island homes from sea level rise, received a medium level of agreement, whereas a similar statement without sort of the tax connotation had a higher level of agreement. Simply, it is appropriate for government actors to prepare for the impacts of climate change. 4.4 out of 5, very high level of agreement. So we, in addition to attitudes generally towards climate change, the survey asked respondents about their level of support for individual climate change adaptation actions, regardless of whether they are homeowners or renters. And we asked them for each of these actions, whether they would consider, would not consider, or already doing already taking these actions, and saw high levels of agreement and willingness to consider things like installing rain gardens or other natural adaptations to one's home. 76% of respondents saying they would consider doing that. Also high levels of agreement or willingness to consider raising and protecting mechanical utilities, dry flood proofing and wet flood proofing, and then lower levels of agreement when it comes to elevating your home, one's home, although I'll point out that in the comments, sort of open-ended questions on the survey, many people who said they wouldn't consider doing this or they were opposed to doing it indicated that they were themselves not homeowners, so the question was not truly eligible for them or applicable to them, or that they believed they lived in an area of the island where that simply wasn't necessary. In addition to those types of actions, we asked respondents about their attitudes towards actions that they could take to reduce their contributions to climate change, such as conserving electricity, purchasing locally grown food, conserving home heating and cooling costs, and so forth, and saw very high levels of people already doing this. So for the top 4 bars in the slide here, more than half of respondents indicate that they already are doing what they can to conserve electricity, for example. And then going down the list, we have a few more actions here, and saw that for those actions where people are not already taking them, such as buying offsets for carbon emissions, we saw a high level of willingness to consider doing that in the future. And I think that's most notable perhaps with the action at the bottom, using a green electricity supplier for your home or business, or something like 10 or 12% of people already doing that, and nearly 3/4 of respondents indicate indicated that they would consider doing that in the future. Coming towards the end of the presentation now, just want to point out, we also asked about 4 very specific community actions, so not an action that an individual or homeowner would take, but an important community action to prepare for climate change and what level of support they received, and saw overall very high levels of support for these 4 actions: living shorelines, tidal surge barriers, public rain gardens, and raised sidewalks and neighborhoods. And these actions are organized from top to bottom, from most to least support on the slide here. I should also point out that each of these actions are defined in greater detail in the survey, in case one of these actions seems unfamiliar to any of you, as it likely would, and that our report, which is linked to in the press release, which is linked to in the agenda for this meeting, includes those definitions. So that's where you can go to if you're wondering what exactly we mean by these 4 community actions. We also asked respondents to offer other adaptation strategies that they would like to see on Nantucket that weren't specifically included in our survey. And these included things like erosion control, beach renourishment and stabilization, creation of artificial reefs by sinking ships, planting of dune grasses to protect beaches, managed retreat from vulnerable areas, education and information campaigns, restricting development from those vulnerable areas, permeable sidewalks and pavements, and seawall construction. And finally, in conclusion, I'd like to point out that our number 1 finding is that when it comes to climate change, Nantucketers are certainly alarmed, and really much more so than their peers across the United States. As important, they're prepared and willing to take individual action, and they're supportive of actions by government actors and businesses to prepare for climate change impacts. They're also willing to talk to one another, willing to talk to community members about adaptation strategies, and they're interested in learning more about adapting to climate change impacts. More than half of our respondents did opt in to receive that email from Claire and the folks at Remain. And that regarding individual adaptation actions for homes, the greatest support was for installing rain gardens, capturing that extra rainfall. And regarding mitigation, 4 actions that I pointed out already see participation from more than half of our respondents. Those are actions that can be taken to limit contributions to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And most respondents supported the 4 community actions that we included in the survey: living shorelines, tidal surge barriers, public rain gardens, and raised sidewalks in neighborhoods. I'm happy to take any questions from committee members and then from members of the public today. Claire can also help me out if I get stumped, and I would be happy to correspond with anyone by email if they want more information on the survey or have other questions to ask. I'm sure Claire would as well. So with that, I'll stop my screen share, and I'll take any questions that anyone has.
Thank you very much, Scott. One of the things that sort of leaked out from the beginning slides of the presentation where you're showing the demographic breakdown by age, the people who are, let's say, over 50 have had the most opportunity to experience the effects of climate change. They've seen, where we were decades ago and where we are now. And the people who are, let's say, under 30 are the most likely to believe that climate change will affect them in the future, as they have the most time left, if you will. And I think it's a real challenge to include both perspectives in the planning process. One of the things that we're seeing a little bit of headway, this was after your survey was closed, I think, was getting some interaction with the high schoolers. So we just saw that Veritas, which is our high school newspaper, published 2 articles in their March issue, one about the Coastal Resilience Plan and one about climate change in general. So we're very encouraged to see that conversation starting, and hopefully we will get more participation from the younger group. Other questions or comments from the committee members? Yes, Gary?
Yes, I thought the survey was interesting, but one thing I noticed from the demographics, and I think it's the result of the time that you sent out the survey, which was off-season. When I looked at the survey and I saw the amount of response from people in Monomoy and Grand Point, I happen to be a resident of Grand Point, and I realized those are the very lowest. I realized that you're really not getting an opinion from the seasonal residents. We're talking about, twice as many people or more than the people who live here year round. And interestingly, even when you talk about the willingness to spend tax dollars, most of the tax dollars are paid by seasonal. We pay 90% of the real estate taxes on the whole island. And I venture to say that we seasonal residents would be more likely even than the current full-time residents to use tax dollars to protect the island and their investments, their homes. They're really not investments. These are people that, like myself, have homes on the island. We're coming here for decades and we love, and we'd be willing to spend the money. So I don't know how you have to balance those concerns, since based on the timing when you sent out the survey and the responses, I don't think it really reflects some of the attitudes that might have been reflected had you sent that same survey out in July, certainly in a normal June and July period.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I think that's a great point. I will point out that more than a third of the respondents were from self-identified, seasonal or part-time residents. But I agree that launching the survey in the winter with a lot of our marketing methods presumably helped us reach more year-round residents. We advertised on the radio station. We were in newspapers. We have flyers at the ferry and so forth. So I think that is an important consideration for us to keep in mind in the follow-up survey that we have planned.
Thank you, Scott. Other questions or comments? Jen, and then Peter, and then Matt.
Thank you, Mary. Scott, I'm just curious. It was interesting that the respondents were more alarmed than what you would find nationally. And I wonder if there's a way to calculate or take into effect that the people that actually clicked on and completed the survey were probably self-selecting as being more interested and concerned about climate change, and if there's just some metric that you would often apply to surveys like this that would tease that out.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think in general, there's a bias in survey response rates that people who feel more strongly about something are more likely to participate. And I think that is true on both ends of the spectrum. So, I would expect not only people who are extra alarmed to participate in the survey, but if there was a large share of people in Nantucket that were very dismissive of climate change and wanted to tell us about it, that those folks would have responded as well, which we didn't really see too much of. I think there were a couple of responses like that, and that was obvious from looking at some of the open-ended responses. But I think by and large, we can feel good about the representativeness of the survey in that regard.
Thank you, Scott. Peter?
Yes, for Scott, and I guess for Gary to listen in, maybe you could send the survey package to Gary and have him distribute it to all of the non-voting taxpayers, everybody on his list, and get that information specifically.
I'm not sure I'm following, Peter, what you're asking. Gary, do you have a question?
What I'm asking is send the survey so that Gary can distribute it to all the members. If
not the results, but the actual surveys. It's
right.
Wait, okay, I see.
Have that be an addendum. I mean, if only a third of the people were non-voting taxpayers or seasonal people, and the rest were year-round or whatever, sounds like there's an awful lot of people out there that we need information from.
Thank you, Peter. Gary, do you have a response?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have the addresses. The only way to do that would be to put them, there are 9,000 tax bills that go out, and 7,500 go to seasonal residents. So that would be the only way that we could reach them. Certainly our committee doesn't have the, we don't have the information on those 7,500 taxpayers. Thank you anyway. It's a good idea. I wish we could do it.
Thank you, Gary. Matt had a question, and then we'll go to Cecil.
Yeah, just a comment. I think the split between, the split that Gary's talking about with seasonal versus year round, we have that in a lot of aspects of town government. There's the ability for the people who are struggling in doing the work here to pay that has to be sort of understood and respected. I mean, there's a lot of people here who are barely hanging on by their thumbnails. They're, our tax rate is low and we only pay 10%, but that isn't a reason to, increase taxes because we'll lose more people. So that we walk that fine line all the time, and it's gonna increasingly be an issue with this, with resiliency efforts. So, so I'm not, and I'm not really, so I'm just, it's not unusual, Gary, is what I'm saying, is that it's a very difficult topic because the islanders who are living here have a lower average wages and, and have a more difficult, especially sort of what's been happening the last 20 years. We're really turning into a bifurcated community with workers who are piled up in houses, and then, that they're servicing the summer workers. It's worse than it was when I was a kid. So we really, there's no solution to that short term, but I think we have to be aware that the tax consequences are substantial of raising it.
Thank you, Matt. Gary, I'll let you respond, and then we'll go to Cecil.
Yes, I agree with Matt, and I understand that. All I'm thinking is that the seasonal folks would be more willing to spend their own money, not necessarily taking from the tax coffers, but also to make improvements. I know that the folks in Monomoy do that from time to time, where they need changes, and they don't ask the town for that. They put their own money together, and maybe some of the other communities will. Individually as well, the seasonal folks would be willing and more likely to spend their own money to take the steps necessary to stormproof or to deal with the issues that they're facing. So, but I do understand the sensitivity there.
Yeah. And just if I can respond real quick, Maria,
Yes.
that's a good suggestion, Gary, because that does, sort of points toward betterments and dealing with this on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, because then the ability to pay will be baked into how you're dealing with it. So I do think that that's important for us not to forget, so I agree.
Thank you, Matt. Cecil, Executive Director of Remain, sponsor of the survey, did you have a comment to add?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First, part of the reason we did the survey was to be able to measure change over time. So we are going to release this survey again sometime next year, after the end of Envision Resilience and after, increased work across the community on this topic. So to answer, to speak to Gary and Peter, we would absolutely love their support in helping us reach a wider audience when we release this survey again. Because what we're trying to see is a change in attitude or a change in willingness to participate in the adaptation solutions that we're all gunning for, in all of our respective projects. So again, I think the opportunity will arise for you to participate and give us some more names of people to answer the survey when we release it a second time. And then the other thing I wanted to just point out, I think that, almost 90%, Jen, is such a huge number that I firmly believe that even if there was some bias built in, that is such a gigantic number compared to the national number of, somewhere near 30%. So I think it's just without a doubt that this island has been educated, witnessed, and they understand the impact of sea level rise in our community. And I think that gives us all great reason to think that we can accomplish things. We're going to hopefully meet with a friendly audience when we present some ideas for adaptation across the board. And then the final thing is, I think we should all take great solace in hearing that our participants were so willing to make adaptive changes on their own property. And we at Remain and with the Envision Resilience, we're focusing on education opportunities and community engagement opportunities that are starting in the summer, but will run through December. And we're going to use a lot of what we learned in this survey to come up with creative ways to reach out to our community. So if you have suggestions or speakers or presentations that you would like to fold into our community engagement, and just so I'm saying all this probably and I probably should have said what we're doing. So we're having a big public presentation of the results of the students' work in June. So you'll all be invited to see the students' unbelievable proposals for Nantucket Harbor in June. And then starting in July, we are going to run an exhibition of their presentations in the Macy Warehouse on Strait Wharf from June through December. So we're using that exhibition time as a launching pad for community engagement activities. So I'm looking at you, Sarah, and you, Jen, and a lot of you on this, that if you have community engagement topics that you would like to fold into our program, especially given that we know that people are interested in rain gardens and plants and living shorelines and Graham, they're interested in ways to reduce their impact, their footprint on Nantucket. So I think if we can all work together to do that community engagement work, then I think in the next time we do the survey, Gary, I hope that we'll have folded in more of those seasonal residents into the engagement, and hopefully they then will want to answer the survey.
Thank you, Cecil. And I just want to echo that community engagement is hard. It takes effort. It doesn't just happen by putting a notice somewhere and hoping people respond. So first, a thank you to Remain for including information about the Coastal Resilience Plan in their follow-up email with resources. We appreciate that very much. And a reminder to all of us who have a membership in any organization, whether it's a conservation-focused organization or a community-focused one, or a social organization, when you see a survey and you're interested in having good results, share that survey with the members of that organization in whatever way that you can, so that we do get better engagement. And it is an effort, but it is well rewarded, I think. Further comments or questions regarding the survey, please? Yes, Ian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I don't want to be the skunk at the party, but Carrie's smiling at me. I had no idea that of the 9,000 tax bills sent out, 7,500 were seasonal residents. It seems a remarkable imbalance in some ways, considering there are 15,000+ full-time people living here, from what I understand. And I'm totally sympathetic to Matt's, point about trying to keep tax levels down. But my understanding is that we have one of the lowest rates of the 300 municipalities in the state. Of 300 municipalities, right? We're we're the 5th or 6th from the bottom in terms of our assessments. And of course, if the assessment was raised, the actual amount, and maybe Holly's shaking her head there, so she's gonna, I look forward to hearing that I'm wrong on this. But any raise in the assessment would actually the burden would be taken by the seasonal residents rather than the year-round residents, and there probably could be abatements added in there. I just, in terms of being creative about trying to get the money that we need, maybe I should focus on my own checkbook first. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Holly, you have a response, and Matt, you may have something to add as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, as a Nantucket native, had the pleasure of growing up on this island, as a taxpayer myself, and as a town employee, I think this is a very sensitive issue, and I tip my hat off to Matt and the rest of the select board. But with that, I think there's also other avenues that the town has been able to pursue through the federal and state grants to tackle this whole resiliency effort, which we have done so far and been very successful as well. So I want to just notate that on the subject of increased property taxes, especially when you look at the average citizen, if they're able to pay taxes and what that means. And, you know, I think that would also affect the everyday citizen in trying to live and work and enjoy this beautiful place that we all appreciate. So that was just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. And Matt?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. Our rate is low, but our average assessment is high. It's one of the highest in the state. And if your you know, you think about the rule of 7, if it goes up 7%, your taxes double every 10 years. So, and they have been going up. It's a math equation. Our rate keeps going down because our assessments, especially on the high end, keep going up. It doesn't mean that the people who are, you know, year round and struggling aren't struggling. And if we increase it on them, they're still going to struggle. They're going to struggle more. And so I think that that has to, you know, and we're trying to find ways around it. Like you're saying, Ian, we're trying to find ways to, you know, waive fees and tier fees and do other things. It's why I always talk about betterments. You know, I don't get very far. It's not, those are not popular with the development industry, the lawyers, the real estate agents, the builders, everyone that services them. You know, they like that, you know, they want those things subsidized. So I'm not very popular when I talk about that, but we really should be, especially when we start talking about, you know, $500 million projects for coastal resiliency. You know, there's no way we can do that. The other thing that people have to think about is a lot of small businesses that you love on the island and that are disappearing very quickly are struggling. They pay at, you know, almost double the rate that the residents pay, you know, and they also require, like someone like me, we require housing and other things. And, you know, our first, you know, pick a number, $30,000, $45,000 a year goes to the town. And I can go up 2% a year on that. I can afford that. I can't go up, you know, it can't double in 10 years or I'm out of business. And that's the same with, and I'm a long time successful business. That's the same with a lot of places that we just take for granted on island. The select board has, you know, tried to lower the, you know, disparity between commercial and residential, especially because many of those residential Gary's talking about are in fact commercial anyway. They're renting, you know, they rent out and the people, some people don't even live there. So there's a whole bunch of other issues that we're dealing with. And so we have to be very careful.
So I'll point out that we're straying a little bit off topic here, although it's a good discussion to understand where financing can come from for these projects. Were there any other questions or comments about the survey results? Seeing none, thank you again, Scott, for the presentation, and thank you to Claire and Cecil from Remain for bringing it to us. And we look forward to more. So the next item on our agenda is committee review and any comments on the Arcadis. It says January and February reports was included in the packet. I'll just note that the report is cumulative, so there are not 2 reports. The February report includes all of the January and prior activity. Did anyone have questions or comments on that report? It's not intended to provoke a dramatic discussion, just giving the committee an opportunity to air any questions or comments that they have. Okay, seeing none. Vince, was there anything you wanted to say about this?
No, it's pretty self-explanatory. If anyone does have questions as things go along, happy to answer questions. I send these out every month. I have to apologize. I missed one. I was a couple of weeks late sending the January report, I think. There's a reference in this report to a memo that we tried to get right internally. I had other town staff go over it. It's now pretty much near complete. If people want it, it's available. And as I was saying to Sarah this day 2 weeks ago, that this would be helpful to the land bank question and the one pager that we might be developing.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to this under new business or under future topics. So we'll come back to this. All right, if there are no comments, the next item on the agenda is an update from Vince on the committee's participation in the Baxter Road Alternative Access Option Study.
Thank you, Mary. I had hoped that I would be able to give more information to, I'm just going to stop sharing this, beg your pardon. That I would be able to give more information to the committee. Unfortunately, it's taking a little longer than anticipated to organize this. There had been a suggestion that this might be something that will be done through executive session by the select board. Unfortunately, it doesn't meet the criteria for that. It's the kind of thing that's going to be worked on as a workshop. So it will involve the select board, CRAC and key town staff will all be present in one meeting. So then the question is, when is it going to be? Unfortunately, I don't have an answer. So once I do, I'm going to ask that people be flexible, please. Committee members attempt to attend, and hopefully almost begging people, please make quorum when that will happen. It will, I don't know when it will be. There's a chance it'll be during a daytime, and I don't know if it could be a Monday or a Thursday, who knows at this point. But I want to put it on people's radar that this is something that will come up in the next couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, I should think. And as soon as I have information, I promise I'll send it out straight away to try and give people the maximum amount of time to be able to attend. Does anyone have any questions on that?
Seeing nothing from committee members. Thank you, Vince. We'll wait for an update with a specific request. So we do have the opportunity for public comment on the agenda. Are there any members of the public that want to offer a comment or ask a question at this time? You can either use the raise hand feature or you can send a chat message to me or to Vince. And since this is open public comment, if you're not successful, please unmute yourself and just let us know that you have a comment. Yeah, I'm not seeing any response. Again, send a chat message to us if we've missed you. Committee reports. So are there any committee members who have a report from their representative committees or other agencies? Yes, Ian, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the Conservation Commission had a special meeting yesterday evening to consider the 2019 annual report from SBPF about the geotubes on the east end of the island. And I think for all concerned, the most disconcerting aspect of it was that there's been a cumulative shortfall of nearly 30,000 cubic yards, which is over a year's worth of sand. And so it turns out that basically SPPF at the moment has triggered 3 failure criteria. And so going forward, CONCOM is going to have to consider those. And so I urge anybody who's interested in it to go on the town's website, YouTube website, to watch the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Other reports from committee members? Jen?
Thank you, Mary. I wanted to update the committee on a new initiative that the Conservation Foundation is working on that impacts coastal resiliency. The NCF and TTR, the Trustees for the Reservations, has recently kind of initiated a project to look at coastal resilience on the Coscata-Coatue Wildlife Refuge, which each organization owns portions of and shares the access and tries to manage the two refugees kind of in tandem together. And so we recognize, and there's been a lot of talk recently about the resiliency of CO2, just as it is for a property for the two organizations, but also for the island as a whole and the harbor, and thinking about, you know, what happens with sea level rise, erosion, climate change, and the refuge itself. So the two organizations are working together to assess coastal resilience and potential natural adaptive measures to 4 areas on the refuge that have been identified as being particularly susceptible. Part of that susceptibility is access to the refuge itself, so erosion focused on some of those access roads. Other issues are just the resiliency of the barrier beach itself and what happens with salt marsh migration and washover on some areas where it's not so much public access, but the structure of the refuge. So we've actually contracted with consultants with Woods Hole Group, who were out last week and tramped across the entire refuge, looking at everything. And they will be working on 4 key areas that we've identified, look at the processes that are going on there, look at where the susceptibility is coming from, where the risk is coming from, and then give the organizations input on what potential natural-based solutions could function on the refuge. And there will be, the timeline is kind of the end of September, as everything seems to be right now, for the reports from them. And it will give us a guideline going forward on what is possible, what the cost of potential solutions are, and there will be potential for public comment, input, and reflection as the process continues. So we're just in the initial stages, just started last week. But I wanted to make sure CRAC was aware of it, and I will keep you guys updated as any information comes out or places to comment.
Thank you, Janet. I think that's going to be important work and great information to have. Matt and then Vince.
Yeah, just a question for Jen. Will they look at things like Dr. Hill talked about the Dutch sand engine? Will Woods Hole consider things like that?
So I believe they're at least, Matt, going to look at all of the resources that exist for, you know, erosion, sand movement, et cetera. We don't have, and this is kind of something we've identified as an issue for island-wide, is that whole sediment transport and really an understanding of where the sediment is going, a sediment budget for that area of the island. But I know that's something the town's talked about, we've talked about, T2R has talked about. So if it isn't part of their actual analysis, it might be identified as something that needs to happen in the future.
Thank you, Jen. Vince?
Great to hear, Jen, and thank you for the update. As the plan develops, would it be possible for the CRP consultants to get some updates and some information and make sure that the two plans play nice together and will hopefully have some synchronicity between them? Would that be possible? I'm happy to work with you on that front if needed.
Yep, definitely. I think the plan is not to, or the intention is not to supplement what the CRP is, but to build off it, kind of, you know, as that next step of development. We just happened to come into funding for the project now, as opposed to in September, but I'll make sure we coordinate because we want to be on the same page.
And the same token, anything you need from the CRP, reciprocity works well. And I'm happy to get you anything you need that you don't already have, which is pretty little.
Great. Thanks, Vince.
Thank you, Vince. Holly has a comment.
And I apologize. Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize. I was not at the March 9th meeting, but I noticed in the minutes that that the land bank has also started with Woods Hole. So I think that's great to see all of these organizations working together, and you know, Woods Hole is a great organization. So yes, I echo Vince's comment about being able to make sure that those consultants also work with ours moving forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Holly. It sounds like we're going to have a big reveal in September with inviting all the parties to, you know, one day after the next. Yeah, it'll be quite a month for climate change awareness. Other committee reports from other members. I do have some. Vince and I were able to appear at the Commission on Disabilities meeting last week, I think it was. And Vince went through the Meeting in a Box toolkit. So that was great first run for that. And we were very happy to to offer the opportunity for another segment of the community, which isn't always thought of first, to have input into the coastal resilience plan. So we encourage them to download the app and let people know about it and provide feedback. And I think that went very well. Vince, do you have any comments or reflections on that meeting?
Nothing major. It was good to hear from a different segment of the community and understand how the CRP may or may not impact them. That was pretty interesting. Lots of comments on sidewalks, lots of comments on access to public and private properties, particularly businesses. The Meeting in a Box worked really well. I just had to read it and understand it fully, being able to give the presentation and then being able to take the notes live and then just, once the meeting was over, do a tiny bit of editing and press submit. It really worked well to give direct feedback to the CRP. You just have to be able to understand it, and it's kind of set up to read directly off the page. And as the kind of presenter who puts up images and then talks about it, it's a bit of a different presentation style, but it's designed so that you don't have to do much other than read it. So it was actually a very beneficial thing, and it could be used by anyone, which is the exact intent of it.
Great, thank you, Vince. As I mentioned, I also had reached out to Veritas, the high school newspaper, and spoke to Reese Burns, and she did write an article about the coastal resilience plan that came out March 12th. I also found out from John Carl McGrady, who's the editor of the paper, that there is a climate group at the high school, and they are interested in finding out more about the coastal resilience plan. So hopefully we'll have an announcement of their event. And also, I was invited to attend. I hope that perhaps others will be as well. It's sometime in April. I don't have the details yet, but we will definitely get them out once we have them. Anything else on committee reports? Yes, Peter.
Okay. One of the things we've been talking a lot about over the last several meetings at the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board is starting with scallopers telling us that there's excessive amounts of sand in scallops that they are harvesting this winter and last winter. And then looking into that, we were finding that there is lots of buildup of sand in certain areas, certain eelgrass beds, and that is not only a problem for scallopers who don't want to pass on the sand to their customers, but also for the conservation groups that are involved in replanting and transplanting of eelgrass in the harbor. And so working with Dave Franzuto, former harbor master, now a member of our board, as well as Jeff Carlson, advising us, and a person who was just on the first talk, Steve McKenna, we are exploring the possibility of doing small, I guess I'd want to say nano or even micro dredging projects where we suck sand out of certain areas to have it so that there isn't so much sand that the eelgrass isn't going to work out. This is just, we're just talking about this. So I just wanted to make the committee aware of that. This ties into the sediment discussion we were just having, and it also probably be part of a larger dredging plan that hasn't fully come to fruition for the town, but this is one of the things we're concerned about.
Thank you, Peter. Jen?
Mary, if I can, Peter, I just have a follow-up question. I don't know if you know the answer to it, but if there's been discussion, is there thought on why there is so much excess sand? And of course, I go to thinking about the projects that are erosion control projects that have, sacrificial sand, but also some of the work Sarah and I have done that has just shown there's such an increase in erosion of dunes and increase of loose, unconsolidated sand. I'm just curious what the discussion's been.
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
What we get from the Natural Resources Department, and I think the Army Corps of Engineers, some of this is the shoring up of the jetties 3-4 years ago. and filling in the holes, and the increase of the tide coming in and out of the harbor by about 3/4 of a knot, which means that more of the sand all around the harbor gets shaved off and redistributed. Another situation was the ferries this winter blasting in and out of the harbor and not slowing down until they were past Brant Point. And so with the help of our harbor master, Sheila Lucy, and and I guess myself writing the letters, we wrote letters to all the ferry companies and asked them when they're coming into the harbor to throttle back before they get to the cut. And when they're leaving the harbor, not to throttle up until they go past the cut in the East Jetty, because those boats are basically giant jet skis with water jets that shoot sand all over the place, and the wake goes by, and the fishermen are talking about how the Horseshead, which is a eelgrass bed that is directly between First Point and Kotu Point, right there across from Brant Point, is getting covered over with sand because of the boats coming and going. And it's a problem that happens in the summertime with so many boats going by. But and we have noticed, meaning our board and fishermen and Sheila and Tara Riley, that the boats have been slowing down. So those are just a couple of the things.
Vince, go ahead.
Hi, Peter. Sorry, this is just the ecologist in me. I can't help it. And these are things you may or may not be able to answer. Is there any difference between Nantucket Harbour and Nantucket Harbour in the amount of sand that shellfish fishermen have been talking about? And then my second question is there anyone looking at water turbidity, how cloudy the water is, which is kind of a marker for how much sand is getting kicked up?
The turbidity would be a question for Tara Riley, because the high turbidity, low turbidity means sunlight doesn't reach the eelgrass, which means it doesn't grow. So that is definitely a question for Tara. And I know that the harbor surveys that have been going on last year are going to continue this year for scallops and eelgrass, and that information will inform you. And I'm just going to take a guess here after being out here for so long, but the sand that's in Nantucket Harbor that built up the last big event was when Esther's Island was separated from Smith's Point. And that event happened on what we call the Patriots Day storm of 2007 in April. And that stayed open for 2 years until October of 2009. And the cut widened so much that boats could go through, but it brought a lot of sand through that cut and created a much bigger bar of sand in the middle of the harbor. The cut has since closed up, and I'm not a coastal geologist, but it's a pretty fair bet that the current that goes between Smith's Point and Tuckernuck Island creates a circulating current that comes in and out of the harbor and moves sand around. So that's all I can tell you. We haven't had people complaining about it as an issue in Nantucket. It's been more of an issue in Nantucket Harbor because Nantucket Harbor is so elongated and has the spits coming out into the harbor blocking flow. Best I can do.
Thank you, Peter. Any other further comments or questions on that?
It's Matt. Just
Yes,
a quick
Matt.
comment. I'll along with what Peter's saying, some of the sailors have told me the same thing. They're out on the harbor right next to the water, and when the high-speed boats blow by, they can see it. They can see the difference between the slow boats and the high speed, and they think that is causing some of the things that Peter's talking about, the fishermen seeing. And they're right there and seeing the same sort of experiencing the same. So.
And those are great observations that you wouldn't necessarily think of when you're doing a coastal resilience plan, that better regulation of the speed of the large boats would have an impact, but it's the kind of in the field observation that's crucial, I think. And so I hope that we get people submitting those kinds of comments to the coastal resilience plan group, not just here in our committee, but directly from the public. I don't know what else is out there that's always of interest. What people experience is very powerful compared to what a scientist imagines. I do see that Deanne Atherton has a hand raised. Deanne, is this on the subject that we're talking about right now? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, it is, Mary. It's just about the sand. Just
Thank you. Go ahead.
A comment I wanted to make. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. In one of the Envision Resilient Nantucket presentations, one of the speakers, Dr. Christina Hill, was very impressive, and she tailored a lot of her comments to Nantucket. And one of the points she made was the absolutely necessity of our having an island-wide sediment transport plan, so we know where the sand is coming from and where it's going. And I was just thinking, I didn't have a chance to get on to ask Julia when she was here, perhaps there is MVP or CZM funding for such a study, and maybe that's a role that CRAC could play in advocating for such a study. I think it would help all of the consultants who are working with all of the neighborhoods in the various groups. That's my comment.
Thank you, Deanne. Vince?
Thank you, Mary. I've said it at CRAC before, and I'll probably have to say it a few times more, and I've no problem saying it. It's a very fair guess, better than fair guess. It's a very strong guess that an island-wide dredge plan for both harbours and a sediment transport study will be recommendations from the Coast Resilience Plan. It's also something that I'm already working on, and we're trying to put into the budgeting cycle for the for the Natural Resources Department to try and find out how that will work going forward. So they're definitely on the radar, and I'm actively trying to get ideas together on that front. And if it's a recommendation from the Coast Resilience Plan, Coast Resilience Advisory Committee will be involved. That's a certainty.
Great.
Thank you, Vince. Holly?
I just also want to notate that the town emphasized that it's also in our HMP as strategies to do that exactly. So just want to notate that for the record. Thanks.
Thank you, Holly. Okay, any other committee reports? I do have one more, if nobody else has one. So Fritz is our planning board representative. He's not here today, but the Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Council met recently, and I was there at the meeting. So the planning department is working on updates to area plans. The town area is a new area, and so that will be developed from scratch. However, the commercial core and the waterfront is not included in the planning area. So there will probably not be a lot of coastal resilience concern in the town area plan. The decision was made at the planning department that those two areas, the waterfront and the commercial, were different enough that they should get their own focus and not try to be wrapped together with the large residential area of town. However, the town association, which is the group that put forward the idea for a town area plan, does believe that they're to some degree inseparable because activities in the commercial and the waterfront areas do affect the residential areas. So there will be some attention, but I did want to let everybody know that that plan is going forward with primarily a focus on the residential area. And just also note, Brant Point already has its own area plan. So this also does not include Brant Point in the town area. The Surfside area, that a group from the Surfside Homeowners Association had done a look at their existing plan. And I think the consensus was that they are going to sort of reform. So that will be some months before they start to move forward. They had not talked directly to the planning board about what the process of reviewing an area plan should entail. And so they took a look and they had some notes, but they need to sort of reorganize in the proper format in order to review the plan. The Sconset area plan, there was an active review of that, and I think there are recommendations coming out of that. So that is probably the one that is closest to being revised. And Nantucket plan also, I think, was very closely examined and has some recommendations. I apologize, I was just looking for my notes and I don't have them. So if I misspoke on any of that, I will let Vince know and we can send that information out to people. But there was a further comment from the planning department in general that this is certainly a lot to handle for them, and that other areas that might need planning simply can't be accommodated at this time. There isn't the staff and the time available to do anything more than what we're currently doing. Holly, if you have anything to add from the planning department perspective or correction for what I've said, please feel free.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I think you did that pretty good. I will notate that from a resiliency perspective, Sconset Advisory Committee actually has a couple members that are included within the area plan. And they're actually wanting to include basically a notation about our resilient Nantucket efforts, because obviously Sconset is outlined in there, specifically Codfish Park, and trying obviously to prepare. So they wanted to make sure that our planning effort that we're doing, also tying in with the coastal resiliency plan, was included in the area plan. So they're thinking resiliency, which is great.
Thank you, Holly. Okay, is that everything for committee reports? Not seeing any other responses. New business, discussion of upcoming meeting dates and topics. So we have our upcoming meetings. April 13th, Trevor Johnson from Arcadis will be presenting sort of a progress report on the Coastal Resilience Plan. This is part of his scheduled quarterly reports to our committee, and he will be including the technical report that Vince referenced earlier. Also planned for that agenda would be the one-page document that Sarah was talking about, so that we're trying to wrap all those together since they are closely related. Vince, is there anything else you wanted to add on April 13th? We haven't formally set the agenda, but I wanted to give people that heads up. And
after you, Mary.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
Okay. Just to clarify, it's the meeting with Trevor is on the mid-project report that is currently in production by Arcadis. So it will heavily inform the final report in September. So we want to make sure we get this one right. I haven't gotten a chance to even look at it myself yet. So it's going to do one round of internal review. And then after that, I got to get notes back to Arcadis and we'll take it from there. That's just to clarify.
Thank you, Vince. Sarah, you had a comment?
Yeah, in terms of the one-page document, I would like to discuss the option of the one-page document or a landscape document. I have my feelings either way, which one we focus on. So I think it could be either, but I would like, before we dive deep into the one-page document, I would like to kind of make a pitch for doing a landscape one too. So I think okay. I will send information and examples of both.
Great, thank you, Sarah. We'll make space for that on the agenda on the 13th. The other thing that we are trying to cook up is a harbor focus. And with Jen's news that the Conservation Foundation and the trustees of reservations are looking at CO2, we may need to adjust our timing because I want to make sure that it fits with the work that they're doing. But the idea would be to invite homeowners associations around the harbor and other landowners such as the Conservation Foundation and the trustees of reservations. And also in particular, the shellfish industry, if you wrap your mind around the concept that they own the bottomlands, or that they, not that they own them, but they they have a business activity in the underwater land of the harbor. Again, trying to tease out any observations that would be valuable in planning coastal resilience. So that is in the works, but the date is not yet fixed, and Vince and I will work on that. Other than that, other suggestions for topics are always welcome. And if anybody has any questions, the other thing I know, we have 3 weeks between today's meeting and the April 13th meeting. So hopefully that gives people a little bit of breathing room if we need to fit in the meeting with the select board and town admin for the Baxter Road plan. Anything else on future meeting dates and topics? Okay. So we have our reminders about the Coastal Resilience Plan resources and the app to download. Is anybody else have something they want to add? And if not, we will take a motion to adjourn. Sarah?
I just wanted to quickly, because we, the homeowners brochure was finalized by the select board. Did we push that? Hasn't it gone out? I didn't know, like I wanted to share it as per our work and things, but I didn't know if the town wanted to share it first or how that was going.
Vince.
Thank you, Mary. So I thought I sent an email to all CRAC members about this a day last week. I think it was Thursday. So Mary presented it Wednesday night. Thursday morning, I had Florencia put it on the town website, and then later Thursday morning, I sent everyone a link. I thought I'm happy to do that again. That's no problem. It's on the CRAC page on the left-hand side. It is a new tab saying homeowner preparedness or something to that effect. And it's up there. It's been pushed out. I'm also working on getting it to Civic League so that they can distribute it to all their membership. And I'm just going ahead with the plan that we discussed this day 2 weeks ago.
Thank you, Vince. Sarah?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks, Vince. I did get that email. I just didn't know if it had been shared on social media yet by the town's website or what the, I mean, just putting it as a resource is great, but we need to like get it out. So I wasn't sure if it had gone out in those avenues yet, or if it was emailed to anyone other than.
No. So what I've been working on is getting Florencia, who did a lot of the artwork and or a presentation in this, or getting it in a good format. So what she wants to do is send it out in the town's newsletter towards the end of this month. I don't know what day that's going out. And then she wants to do it as look at doing it as a social media blast around about the same time. So it's going to hopefully be on the town's social media account at some stage. Then I can put it on the NRD Facebook account as well, but try and coordinate it is what I'm up to at the moment.
Great, thank you, because I'll wait to share it until the town does that. So thank you very much.
Well, it is public, it is live. If you want to, there's nothing stopping you. It's there.
I don't want to steal anyone's thunder, so thanks.
Well, thank you for asking, Sarah, because I meant to mention that select board presentation under the committee reports. And yeah, we had so many this time. That was one that I forgot. All right, if there's nothing else, a motion to adjourn.
So
or we can stay here all day.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Sarah. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Peter. So roll call vote, Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Graham Durovich.
Aye.
Ian Golding. Ian, I skipped Matt, unfortunately, in my alphabetical order, so I may have caught you in a way. Thank you.
Aye. Aye.
Ian, I haven't heard a vote.
Oh, aye, definitely aye. Thank you.
Jen Carber.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all. We'll see you in 3 weeks, if not before.
Thank you, Mary. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay, stopping the recording now.